In the scorching heat of the Arizona desert, where legends are born from dust and determination, one man's split-second decision to run toward danger instead of away from it would forever change the course of two cultures that have been enemies for generations. This is not a tale of cowboys and Indians from Hollywood's imagination. This is the true story of Marcus Sullivan, an Irish-American rancher who saved the life of Standing Tall Woman, a 7-foot Apache warrior whose father would later ask him to do something that seemed impossible: bridge a canyon of hatred that had claimed countless lives on both sides. What started as a desperate rescue from a raging wildfire would become a journey that challenged everything both communities believed about each other, proving that sometimes the most unlikely friendships can emerge from the ashes of conflict. This is their story, raw, authentic, and more extraordinary than any fiction ever written. Marcus Sullivan wiped the sweat from his forehead as he guided his horse along the rocky ridge overlooking his ranch. The August sun beat down mercilessly on the Arizona territory, and the air felt thick and dry like breathing through cotton. He had been checking his cattle all morning, making sure they had enough water in the scattered pools that dotted his property. The drought had been going on for 3 months now, and every rancher in the territory was struggling to keep their livestock alive. His ranch sat in a valley between two mountain ranges, about 40 miles southeast of Tucson. Marcus had bought this land 5 years ago, in 1887, with money he had saved working the copper mines in Bisbee. The previous owner, an old German named Klaus Hoffmann, had warned him about the Apache raids that still happen from time to time, but Marcus figured he could handle whatever came his way. He had grown up poor in Boston, the son of Irish immigrants who had fled the potato famine. Hard work and dangerous situations were nothing new to him. As he rode along the ridge, Marcus noticed something strange in the distance. A thin column of smoke was rising from the pine forest that covered the eastern slopes of the mountains. At first, he thought it might be a campfire, but as he watched, the smoke grew thicker and darker. His stomach dropped as he realized what he was seeing: fire. During the dry season, wildfires could spread incredibly fast through these mountains. The pine trees and dry grass would go up like kindling, and the wind could carry the flames for miles. Marcus had seen it happen before, and he knew that once a fire got started in this terrain, it could burn for weeks. He spurred his horse toward the smoke, even though every instinct told him to head the other way. His ranch was probably safe for now, since the fire was on the other side of the valley, but he felt compelled to see how bad it was. Maybe there was something he could do to help. As he got closer to the base of the mountain, the smell of burning pine filled his nostrils. The smoke was getting thicker, and he could hear a sound like distant thunder. That was the sound of fire consuming everything in its path. Marcus tied his horse to a sturdy oak tree about half a mile from where the smoke seemed heaviest and continued on foot. The terrain was rough and rocky, with steep slopes covered in loose stones that shifted under his boots. Manzanita bushes and scattered pines dotted the landscape, and he had to pick his way carefully to avoid sliding down a mountainside. As he climbed higher, the air became hazier, and he could feel the heat from the fire even though he was still some distance away. When he finally reached a small ridge that gave him a good view of the burning area, Marcus was shocked by what he saw. The fire was much larger than he had expected. Flames 20 feet high were racing through the forest, driven by a steady wind that was pushing them downhill toward the valley. Trees that had stood for decades were being consumed in minutes, sending showers of sparks high into the air. But what really caught his attention was movement near the edge of the fire. At first, he thought it might be an elk or a bear trying to escape the flames. Then, he realized it was a person. Someone was trapped down there, and they were in serious trouble. Marcus squinted through the smoke, trying to get a better look. The figure appeared to be very tall, much taller than any person he had ever seen. As the wind shifted and cleared some of the smoke, he could see more clearly. It was a woman, and she was enormous. She had to be close to 7 feet tall, with broad shoulders and long black hair that hung down her back. She was wearing what looked like traditional Apache clothing, a long dress made of deer hide, decorated with beads and fringes. The woman was trapped on a small rocky outcrop, surrounded by burning trees. The fire had apparently moved faster than she could escape, and now she was cut off from any safe path down the mountain. She was moving frantically, looking for a way out, but Marcus could see that she was running out of options. In a few more minutes, the flames would reach her position. Without thinking, Marcus started down the slope toward her. It was incredibly dangerous. The fire was unpredictable, and the smoke made it hard to see where he was going. Burning branches could fall on him at any moment, and if the wind shifted, he could find himself trapped just like the woman he was trying to help. But he could not stand there and watch someone die, no matter who they were. As he got closer, he could see the woman more clearly. She was indeed Apache, and she was beautiful in a fierce, powerful way. Her face was strong and angular, with high cheekbones and dark eyes that reflected both fear and determination. She moved with the grace of someone who had spent her whole life in the mountains, but even her obvious skill and strength were no match for the advancing fire. When she spotted Marcus approaching, her first reaction was shock, then suspicion. Apache and white settlers in this part of Arizona had been enemies for generations. There had been countless raids, battles, and massacres on both sides. Trust between the two groups was practically non-existent. For a moment, she seemed to consider whether Marcus was more dangerous than the fire. But as the flames crept closer to her position, survival instinct took over. When Marcus reached the base of a rocky outcrop and gestured for her to come down, she did not hesitate. The woman was incredibly agile despite her size, moving down the rocks like a mountain cat. But even as she climbed down, Marcus could see that she was favoring her left leg. She had been injured, probably when she was trying to outrun the fire. The moment she reached the ground, Marcus grabbed her arm and pointed toward what he hoped was a safe route down the mountain. The woman was heavier than he expected, and when she put her weight on her injured leg, she nearly collapsed. Without a word, Marcus wrapped his arm around her waist and helped support her as they began their escape. Moving through a forest fire was like being inside hell itself. The air was so hot it burned their lungs with every breath. Burning embers fell around them like deadly snow, and the roar of the flames was so loud they could not hear each other speak. Marcus kept one arm around the Apache woman and used his free hand to shield both of their faces from the heat. Several times, they had to change direction when their path was blocked by fallen trees or walls of flame. Marcus relied on his knowledge of the mountain, gained from years of hunting and tracking cattle in these hills, to find alternate routes. The woman seemed to know the terrain even better than he did, and more than once she pulled him away from areas where the fire was about to spread. They made an odd pair, the short, stocky Irish rancher and the towering Apache woman, struggling together through the smoke and flames. Neither spoke, but they worked together with an efficiency born of desperation. When Marcus stumbled over a hidden rock, the woman caught him. When her injured leg gave out, he held her up. They were complete strangers from enemy cultures, but in that moment, they were simply two human beings helping each other survive. The hardest part was crossing a small ravine where the fire had already burned through on both sides. The ground was still smoking, and scattered logs glowed red-hot in the ash. Marcus found a narrow part of the ravine where they could jump across, but the Apache woman's injured leg made it difficult for her to get enough momentum. Marcus went first, then turned and held out his arms. She hesitated for just a moment, then leaped across the gap. He caught her, and they both tumbled to the ground on the safe side. As they continued down the mountain, the air gradually became clearer and cooler. They were outrunning the fire, but both of them were exhausted and breathing heavily. The woman's leg was getting worse, and Marcus could see that she was in significant pain, though she never made a sound of complaint. Finally, they reached the oak tree where Marcus had left his horse. The animal was nervous and skittish from the smoke, but it had not wandered far. Marcus helped the Apache woman sit down in the shade while he caught his breath and tried to figure out what to do next. For the first time since the rescue began, they looked at each other directly. The woman's dark eyes studied Marcus with a mixture of gratitude and wariness. She was clearly evaluating whether he could be trusted, and Marcus found himself doing the same thing. Everything he had been taught about Apache people told him that she was dangerous, that helping her might have been a terrible mistake. But looking at her now, injured and exhausted, she seemed more human than threatening. The woman spoke first, in English that was heavily accented, but perfectly clear. "You saved my life," she said simply. Marcus nodded, not sure how to respond. "Could not just leave you there," he said finally. "Many of your people would have," she replied. There was no bitterness in her voice, just a statement of fact. "Probably," Marcus admitted. "Many of your people would have let me burn too." A ghost of a smile crossed her face. Probably, she agreed. Marcus looked at her injured leg, which was swelling badly. That needs attention, he said. My ranch is not too far. I have some medical supplies. The woman shook her head. I cannot go to your ranch. My people will think I am dead. They will be looking for me. Where is your tribe? Marcus asked. She gestured toward the higher mountains to the east. 2 days' travel. But I cannot walk that far with this leg. Marcus considered their options. If he brought her to his ranch, any other white settlers who saw her would probably assume she was a threat. If she tried to return to her people alone, she might not make it. And if her tribe came looking for her and found her with him, they might assume he had kidnapped or harmed her. But as he looked at the woman sitting under the oak tree, Marcus realized that none of those concerns mattered as much as the simple fact that she needed help. He had risked his life to save her from the fire. He was not about to abandon her now. What is your name? He asked. My people call me Standing Tall Woman, she replied. White people have trouble with our real names. I am Marcus Sullivan, he said, and I think I know a place where you can rest and heal without anyone bothering you. There was an old line cabin about 5 miles north of his ranch, in a secluded canyon where he sometimes stayed when he was working cattle in that area. It had basic supplies and was far enough from the main ranch that no one was likely to stumble across it. If he could get Standing Tall Woman there, she could recover from her injury and figure out how to get back to her people safely. Standing Tall Woman studied his face for a long moment, as if trying to read his intentions. Finally, she nodded. I will trust you, she said. But if you betray that trust, my father will hunt you down and kill you slowly. Who is your father? Marcus asked, though he was not sure he wanted to know the answer. Chief Running Bear, she replied. Leader of the Chiricahua Apache. Marcus felt his blood run cold. Running Bear was one of the most feared Apache leaders in the territory. His raids had terrorized settlers for decades, and the army had been trying to capture him for years without success. If Standing Tall Woman was his daughter, then helping her was either the best thing Marcus had ever done or the worst mistake of his life. But there was no turning back now. Marcus helped Standing Tall Woman onto his horse, climbing up behind her to provide support. As they rode toward the hidden canyon, the smoke from the forest fire continued to rise behind them, a dark column that would be visible for miles. The fire would probably burn for days, but they had escaped with their lives. Neither of them could have imagined that this chance encounter in the flames would set in motion events that would change both of their worlds forever. The line cabin sat in a narrow canyon surrounded by red rock walls that rose nearly 100 feet on both sides. A small stream trickled through the center of the canyon, providing fresh water year-round, and a few cottonwood trees offered shade from the desert sun. Marcus had discovered this place 3 years ago when tracking a lost steer, and he had built this simple one-room cabin as a shelter for when he needed to work cattle in this remote area. Getting Standing Tall Woman to the cabin proved more challenging than Marcus had expected. Her injured leg made it impossible for her to walk more than a few steps, and she was much heavier than he anticipated. At nearly 7 feet tall and powerfully built, she probably weighed close to 200 pounds. Marcus was strong from years of ranch work, but he was only 5 feet 6 inches tall and weighed about 160 pounds. Supporting her weight while navigating the rocky terrain required all of his strength and determination. By the time they reached the cabin, both of them were exhausted. Marcus helped Standing Tall Woman inside and settled her on the simple wooden bunk that served as a bed. The cabin was spartanly furnished with just the bunk, a small table, 2 chairs, and a stone fireplace. Shelves along one wall held basic supplies: canned food, coffee, flour, sugar, salt, and a few medical items that Marcus kept for emergencies. Standing Tall Woman looked around the cabin with obvious suspicion, as if expecting some kind of trap. Her dark eyes took in every detail, from the rifle mounted above the fireplace to the small window that faced the mouth of the canyon. Marcus realized she was evaluating possible escape routes and weapons she could use if necessary. The fact that she was injured and dependent on his help clearly made her uncomfortable. Marcus lit a fire in the fireplace and put water on a boil. The first priority was examining her leg to see how serious the injury was. When he approached with a basin of warm water and some clean cloth, Standing Tall Woman tensed visibly. I need to look at your leg, Marcus said gently. If it is broken, you need proper medical attention. Standing Tall Woman hesitated, then slowly pulled up the hem of her deer-hide dress to reveal her left leg. Marcus tried to remain clinical and professional, but he could not help noticing that she was remarkably beautiful. Her skin was smooth and bronze-colored, and despite her obvious strength, her legs were perfectly proportioned to her tall frame. The injury was centered around her knee, which was badly swollen and already turning purple. Marcus carefully felt around the joint, checking for broken bones. Standing tall woman winced when he touched certain spots, but she made no sound of pain. Her tolerance for discomfort was far beyond anything Marcus had ever seen. After a thorough examination, Marcus was relieved to discover that nothing seemed to be broken. The knee was severely sprained and possibly had some torn ligaments, but with proper care it should heal completely. The challenge would be keeping standing tall woman off her feet long enough for the healing to take place. Marcus cleaned the scrapes and cuts on her leg with warm water and applied some of the salve he kept in his medical kit. As he worked, standing tall woman watched him intently, as if trying to understand why a white man would take such care with an Apache woman. Her people and his people had been enemies for so long that acts of kindness between them were almost unheard of. "Why are you helping me?" she asked suddenly. Marcus looked up from wrapping her knee with strips of clean cloth. "Because you needed help," he said simply. "That is not an answer," standing tall woman replied. "Your people hate my people. We have killed many of your soldiers and settlers. You should want me to die." Marcus finished securing the bandage and sat back on his heels. It was a fair question, and he was not entirely sure he had a good answer. "I guess I did not think about Apache people or white people," he said slowly. "I think about individuals. When I saw you trapped by that fire, I saw a person who was going to die if someone did not help. I could not live with myself if I just walked away." Standing tall woman studied his face for a long moment. "You are different from other white men I have known," she said. "How many white men have you known?" Marcus asked. A shadow crossed her face. "Enough," she said quietly. "Soldiers who came to kill my people. Traitors who cheated us. Men who thought Apache women existed for their pleasure." Marcus felt a surge of anger at the implication, but he kept his voice calm. "I'm not like those men," he said. "No," standing tall woman agreed. "I think you're not. But I still do not understand why you risk so much to help me. If your people learn that you save an Apache, they will call you a traitor. If my people think you capture me, they will torture you to death." Marcus had been trying not to think about those possibilities, but he knew she was right. The relationship between Apaches and white settlers in Arizona Territory was so hostile that any cooperation between them was seen as betrayal by both sides. By helping standing tall woman, Marcus was putting himself in serious danger from both communities. "Then, we better make sure neither of our people finds out," Marcus said with a slight smile. For the first time since he had met her, standing tall woman smiled back. It transformed her entire face, softening her fierce features and revealing a warmth that had been hidden beneath her warrior's mask. Over the next few days, Marcus settled into a routine of caring for his unexpected patient. Each morning, he would ride back to his ranch to check on his cattle and handle any urgent business. He told his few neighbors that he was working cattle in the remote canyons and would be away from the ranch for several days. Then, he would return to the line cabin with fresh supplies and food. Standing tall woman proved to be a fascinating companion. Despite their language and cultural differences, she was obviously highly intelligent and well-educated in the ways of her people. She spoke 4 languages fluently: Apache, Spanish, English, and some Navajo. She knew the medicinal properties of dozens of desert plants, the migration patterns of animals, and the location of every water source within 50 miles. As her leg began to heal and she became more comfortable with Marcus, standing tall woman started sharing stories about her life and her people. She told him about growing up as the daughter of a chief, learning to hunt and fight alongside the warriors. She described the traditional Apache way of life, following the seasons, living in harmony with the land, and maintaining the spiritual beliefs that had sustained her people for thousands of years. Marcus was surprised to learn that Apache society was far more complex and sophisticated than most white people believed. They had detailed laws, complex religious ceremonies, and a rich oral tradition that preserved their history and wisdom. Standing tall woman herself was not just a warrior, but also a healer and storyteller who held an important position within her tribe. In return, Marcus shared his own story. He told her about growing up poor in Boston, watching his parents struggle to survive in a country that did not welcome Irish immigrants. He described working in the dangerous copper mines, saving every penny to buy his own land, and his dream of building a successful ranch in Arizona territory. Standing Tall Woman was particularly interested in his reasons for leaving the East and coming to Apache country. "You left everything familiar to start over in a hostile land," she observed. "That takes great courage. Or great stupidity," Marcus replied with a laugh. "Perhaps both," Standing Tall Woman said. "But I think mostly courage. My people respect courage above all other qualities." As the days passed, Marcus found himself looking forward more and more to his conversations with Standing Tall Woman. She had a sharp wit and a unique perspective on the world that challenged many of his assumptions. She made him think about the conflict between their peoples in ways he had never considered before. "Your people believe that land can be owned," Standing Tall Woman said one evening as they sat by the fire. "That a man can draw lines on paper and claim that everything inside those lines belongs to him alone. That is how civilization works," Marcus replied. "Without property rights, there will be chaos." Standing Tall Woman shook her head. "My people believe that the land owns us, not the other way around. We are part of the land, like the trees and the animals. How can a tree own the soil it grows in? How can a river own its banks? But without ownership, how do you prevent disputes?" Marcus asked, "How do you keep people from taking what others have worked for?" "We share what the land provides," Standing Tall Woman explained. "When there is plenty, everyone has enough. When there is little, we all sacrifice together. Your way creates some men who have everything and others who have nothing. Our way ensures that no one goes without." Marcus had never thought about land ownership from that perspective before. It made him uncomfortable to realize that his entire way of life was based on ideas that seemed foreign and wrong to Standing Tall Woman's people. Their conversations were not always serious, though. Standing Tall Woman had a playful side that emerged once she relaxed her guard. She taught Marcus some Apache words and laughed at his terrible pronunciation. She showed him how to identify edible plants and demonstrated Apache techniques for tracking animals. In return, Marcus taught her some Irish drinking songs and told her stories about life in Boston. On the fourth day, Standing Tall Woman's knee had improved enough that she could walk short distances with the help of a stick Marcus had carved for her. She insisted on contributing to their daily needs, despite his protests that she should rest. She gathered medicinal herbs from the canyon walls and prepared them according to traditional Apache methods. She also caught fish from the stream, using techniques Marcus had never seen before. "Apache women are not helpless," she explained when Marcus expressed amazement at her skills. "We must be as capable as the men if our people are to survive." That evening, as they shared a meal of fresh trout and wild greens, Standing Tall Woman became serious again. "I must return to my people soon," she said. "They will be worried, and there will be search parties looking for me." Marcus felt a stab of disappointment, though he tried to hide it. "How was your leg feeling?" he asked. "Better each day. I think I can travel in another day or two if I am careful." "Where will you tell them you have been?" Marcus asked. Standing Tall Woman was quiet for a moment. "I will say that I was trapped by the fire and injured, and that I found shelter in a cave until I could travel again." "Will they believe you?" "My father will ask many questions. He is very wise and notices everything. But I think he will accept my story if I tell it carefully." Marcus stared into the fire, trying not to think about how empty the cabin would feel once Standing Tall Woman was gone. "What will happen then?" he asked. "I do not know," she admitted. "My people are facing difficult times. The army is putting more pressure on us to surrender and go to the reservation. Many of our young warriors want to fight to the death rather than live like prisoners. My father tries to find a path that will save our people, but the choices are all bad." Marcus had heard about the government's efforts to force all Apache tribes onto reservations. From the white settlers' perspective, it was a necessary step toward peace and civilization. But hearing Standing Tall Woman describe it from the Apache point of view made him realize how devastating it must be for people who had lived freely in these mountains for generations. "Maybe there could be another way," Marcus said tentatively. "Some kind of compromise that both sides could accept." Standing Tall Woman looked at him with sad eyes. "You are a good man, Marcus Sullivan, but you do not understand the hatred between our peoples. There have been too many killings, too much suffering on both sides. The wound is too deep to heal with simple words. They sat in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Standing Tall Woman spoke again. When I return to my people, we will probably never see each other again. It would be too dangerous for both of us. Marcus nodded, though the thought made him incredibly sad. In just a few days, Standing Tall Woman had become more than just someone he was helping. She had become a friend, perhaps the first real friend he had made since coming to Arizona. The idea of going back to his isolated existence on the ranch felt almost unbearable. I want you to know, Standing Tall Woman continued, that meeting you has changed how I think about white people. I will remember that not all of you are enemies. Meeting you has changed me too, Marcus admitted. I will never be able to think about Apache people the same way again. Standing Tall Woman reached across the small table and briefly touched Marcus's hand. Perhaps that is how peace begins, she said. One person at a time, learning to see the humanity in their enemies. That night, Marcus lay awake in his bedroll on the floor, listening to Standing Tall Woman's quiet breathing from the bunk. Tomorrow or the day after, she would be gone, and this strange, wonderful interlude would be over. He would go back to being just another rancher struggling to make a living in hostile territory, and she would go back to being the daughter of a fierce Apache chief. But something fundamental had changed between them, and in both of them. They had proven that understanding and friendship were possible between their peoples, even if it had to remain secret. That knowledge would stay with them forever, no matter what happened in the days to come. On the morning of the 6th day, Standing Tall Woman announced that she felt strong enough to attempt the journey back to her people. Her knee was still tender and slightly swollen, but she could walk without the wooden crutch Marcus had made for her. More importantly, she was becoming increasingly anxious about her extended absence from the tribe. My father will have sent search parties by now, she explained as she tested her weight on the injured leg. If they find tracks leading to this canyon, you could be in great danger. Marcus had been dreading this moment, but he knew she was right. Every day, Standing Tall Woman remained missing increased the likelihood that Apache warriors would come looking for her. And when Apache warriors were searching for a missing tribal member, they tended to kill first and ask questions later. Marcus spent the morning preparing supplies for Standing Tall Woman's journey. He filled a water skin from the stream, wrapped some dried meat and hardtack in a cloth bundle, and gave her a sharp knife in case she encountered any danger along the way. Standing Tall Woman accepted the supplies gratefully, but insisted on leaving something in return. From a leather pouch she wore around her waist, she pulled out a small silver medallion hanging on a thin leather cord. The medallion was about the size of a silver dollar and was intricately engraved with Apache symbols. This belonged to my grandmother, she said, holding it out to Marcus. It is supposed to bring protection to whoever wears it. Marcus started to protest that he could not accept such a valuable and personal item, but Standing Tall Woman pressed it into his hands. Please take it, she said. I want to know that you carry something of my people with you, and perhaps it will help keep you safe. Marcus slipped the cord over his head, and the medallion settled against his chest, warm from Standing Tall Woman's touch. I will treasure it always, he said sincerely. They left the cabin together in the early afternoon, when the sun was at its hottest, and most Apache warriors would be seeking shade. Marcus had saddled his horse and planned to ride with Standing Tall Woman part of the way toward her tribal lands, both to help her if her leg gave out and to make sure she was not followed. The first part of the journey took them through rugged country that Marcus knew well. They followed deer paths and hidden arroyos that provided cover from anyone who might be watching from the higher ridges. Standing Tall Woman moved carefully but steadily, and Marcus was impressed by her endurance. Despite her injury and the trauma she had endured in the fire, she showed no signs of weakness or complaint. As they traveled, Marcus found himself memorizing every detail of Standing Tall Woman's appearance, knowing that this might be the last time he would ever see her. The way the sunlight caught the blue-black highlights in her long hair, the graceful way she moved despite her size, the fierce intelligence that shone in her dark eyes. Even the small scar on her left cheek that she had earned, she told him, during a childhood accident while learning to ride horses. After about 2 hours of travel, they reached a high ridge that offered a view of the mountains where Standing Tall Woman's people lived. From this vantage point, they could see smoke rising from what was probably the tribal camp, still many miles away. Standing Tall Woman studied the landscape carefully, planning her route for the rest of the journey. "I should go alone from here," she said. "If any of my people see us together, it could mean death for both of us." Marcus knew she was right, but saying goodbye felt almost impossible. In less than a week, this remarkable woman had become more important to him than anyone he had ever known. The thought of never seeing her again was like a physical pain in his chest. "Will you be safe traveling alone?" he asked. Standing tall woman smiled slightly. "I'm the daughter of Chief Running Bear. I've been traveling these mountains since I was a child. My people are the ones who should fear for their safety, not me." She was joking, but Marcus knew there was truth in her words. Even injured, Standing Tall Woman was probably more capable of surviving in this harsh environment than most men. They stood looking at each other for a long moment, both knowing that this was goodbye, but neither wanting to say the words. Finally, Standing Tall Woman stepped forward and placed her hand on Marcus's shoulder. "You saved my life," she said simply. "I will never forget that kindness. And I will never forget you." "Nor I you," Marcus replied, his voice thick with emotion. Standing Tall Woman turned and began walking toward the distant mountains. Marcus watched until she disappeared over a ridge, then stood there for several more minutes, hoping she might look back. But she never did. He finally mounted his horse and began the long ride back to his ranch, feeling more alone than he had ever felt in his life. The weeks that followed were among the most difficult of Marcus's life. He threw himself into ranch work, trying to keep busy enough that he would not have time to think about Standing Tall Woman. He repaired fences, moved cattle, dug new wells, and worked from sunrise to sunset until he was too exhausted to do anything but sleep. But despite his efforts to stay busy, Marcus found his thoughts constantly returning to the line cabin and the woman who had shared it with him. He wondered if she had made it safely back to her people. He wondered if her father had believed her story about being trapped by the fire. Most of all, he wondered if she ever thought about him. Marcus also found that his perspective on the conflict between whites and Apaches had changed dramatically. When he heard other ranchers and townspeople talking about Apache raids or military campaigns, he could not help but think about Standing Tall Woman's people facing the loss of their homeland and way of life. The issues that had once seemed black and white now appeared much more complicated. About 3 weeks after Standing Tall Woman's departure, Marcus was in Tucson buying supplies when he overheard a conversation that made his blood run cold. 2 cavalry officers were discussing a recent engagement with Apache warriors in the mountains east of the city. "We tracked them to their camp," one officer was saying. "Had it been 30 or 40 warriors, plus women and children. They scattered when we attacked, but we killed at least a dozen of them." "Any word on which band it was?" the second officer asked. "Running Bear's people, for what we could tell. Found some of their distinctive weapons and gear. That old devil is getting harder and harder to pin down, but we are getting closer." Marcus felt sick to his stomach. The attack had taken place in the same mountain range where Standing Tall Woman's people lived. There was a good chance she had been in that camp when the soldiers attacked. She might be wounded, captured, or worse. For the next several days, Marcus was in agony, wondering what had happened to Standing Tall Woman and her people. He considered riding into the mountains to try to find her, but he knew such a mission would be suicide. A white man traveling alone in Apache territory would be killed on sight, especially after a recent military attack. Marcus tried to get more information by talking to other ranchers and townspeople, but the stories were contradictory and unreliable. Some claimed that Chief Running Bear had been killed in the attack. Others said he had escaped, but that many of his followers had been captured. A few insisted that the whole story was exaggerated and that only a few Apache warriors had been involved. Unable to bear the uncertainty any longer, Marcus finally decided to ride to the line cabin where he and Standing Tall Woman had spent those precious days together. He was not sure what he hoped to accomplish, but he needed to be somewhere that reminded him of her. Perhaps being there would help him figure out what to do. The cabin looked exactly as they had left it, but it felt completely different without Standing Tall Woman's presence. Marcus sat on the bunk where she had slept and tried to imagine her voice, her laugh, her thoughtful comments about the differences between their peoples. The silence was overwhelming. Marcus was about to leave when he noticed something that made his heart skip a beat. There was a small pile of stones near the door that had not been there before. The stones were arranged in a specific pattern that looked deliberate, not accidental. Someone had been to the cabin since he and Standing Tall Woman had left. Examining the stone arrangement more closely, Marcus realized it was probably some kind of message, but he had no idea what it meant. Apache people were known to use symbols and signs to communicate with each other across long distances, but Marcus had never learned to read their code. He spent the rest of the afternoon searching around the cabin for any other signs that someone had been there. Near the stream, he found what looked like the print of a moccasin in a patch of soft earth. The print was large, much larger than a normal person would make. It looked like it could have been made by Standing Tall Woman. Hope began to build in Marcus's chest. If Standing Tall Woman had been to the cabin, it meant she was alive and free. But why had she come? And what did the stone message mean? Marcus decided to stay at the cabin for a few days, hoping that Standing Tall Woman might return or send another message. He brought enough supplies to last a week and settled in to wait. Each morning, he would check to see if the stone arrangement had changed or if there were any new signs around the cabin. On the third day, Marcus's patience was rewarded. When he woke up in the morning and stepped outside, he found that the stone pile had been rearranged. Additionally, there was a small piece of buckskin tied to one of the cottonwood trees. Written on the buckskin and charcoal were 3 words in English: "All is well." Marcus felt a huge surge of relief. Standing Tall Woman was alive and apparently safe. But he was also frustrated that he could not communicate back to her. He had no idea how to leave a message that she would understand, and he was afraid that any attempt to do so might put her in danger if the wrong person found it. Marcus stayed at the cabin for 2 more days, hoping for another message or perhaps even a chance to see Standing Tall Woman again. But nothing more appeared, and he finally accepted that she was probably not coming back. The brief message had been her way of letting him know she was safe, but their paths were unlikely to cross again. Reluctantly, Marcus returned to his ranch and tried to resume his normal life. But the stone message had changed everything for him. Knowing that Standing Tall Woman was alive and that she had thought of him enough to send word of her safety filled him with a happiness he had not felt since their parting. Marcus began making regular trips to the line cabin, ostensibly to check on his cattle in that area, but really hoping for another message from Standing Tall Woman. Most of the time, he found nothing, but occasionally there would be small signs that she had been there. A different arrangement of stones, a mark carved into a tree. Once, a small bundle of medicinal herbs left on the cabin's doorstep. These brief, indirect communications became the highlight of Marcus's existence. He never knew when he might find a sign from Standing Tall Woman, which made each trip to the cabin feel like an adventure. And although they never met face to face, Marcus felt that they were maintaining their friendship through these secret messages. As autumn turned to winter, the messages became less frequent. Marcus assumed that Standing Tall Woman's people had moved to their winter camp, probably in a more sheltered location deeper in the mountains. But even during the coldest months, Marcus continued his regular visits to the cabin, always hoping to find some sign that his Apache friend was thinking of him. The winter of 1892 was particularly harsh, with heavy snows that made travel through the mountains extremely dangerous. For nearly 2 months, Marcus was unable to reach the line cabin at all. When the weather finally improved enough for him to make the journey in early March, he was shocked by what he found. The cabin had been visited recently, despite the difficult winter conditions. But this time, the message waiting for him was different from anything he had seen before. Instead of a simple arrangement of stones or a brief note, there was an elaborate drawing scratched into the dirt in front of the cabin door. The drawing showed 2 figures, one tall and one short, standing on either side of a large fire. Around the edge of the drawing were symbols that Marcus did not recognize, but the overall message seemed clear. Standing Tall Woman was trying to tell him something important about the fire that had brought them together. Marcus studied the drawing for a long time, trying to understand its meaning. Finally, he noticed something that made him gasp. In one corner of the drawing was a small symbol that looked like a crescent moon, and beneath it, 2 smaller crescents. Marcus realized he was looking at a date. Apache people used lunar calendars, and Standing Tall Woman was telling him when something important was going to happen. Based on his rough knowledge of Apache timekeeping, the date appeared to be about 2 weeks away. But what was supposed to happen on that date? And where was it supposed to happen? Marcus stared at the drawing until his eyes watered, but he could not decipher any more information from it. 2 weeks later, Marcus rode to the line cabin on the date indicated by Standing Tall Woman's drawing. He arrived just before sunset and waited nervously to see what would happen. As darkness fell, he began to think that he had misunderstood the message. But Then he heard the sound of horses approaching through the canyon. Marcus's hand moved instinctively to the rifle he carried, but then he remembered where he was and why he had come. If Standing Tall Woman had sent for him, he had to trust that she would not lead him into danger. He stepped out of the cabin and waited. 3 riders emerged from the shadows at the mouth of the canyon. The lead rider was unmistakably Standing Tall Woman, looking magnificent on a painted war horse. Behind her rode 2 Apache warriors, their faces stern and watchful. All 3 were armed and looked like they were prepared for trouble. Standing Tall Woman dismounted and approached Marcus, her expression serious but not hostile. "Marcus Sullivan," she said formally. "I bring greetings from my father, Chief Running Bear. He wishes to speak with you." Marcus felt his blood turn cold at Standing Tall Woman's words. Chief Running Bear was one of the most feared Apache leaders in the entire territory, a man whose name was spoken in whispers by both soldiers and settlers. The idea of meeting him face to face was terrifying, but Marcus also realized he had no choice. To refuse would be an insult that could cost him his life, and besides, he trusted Standing Tall Woman completely. "When does your father want to meet?" Marcus asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Now," Standing Tall Woman replied. "He is waiting in the sacred canyon, 2 hours' ride from here. You will come with us." Marcus looked at the 2 warriors who had accompanied Standing Tall Woman. They sat motionless on their horses, watching him with expressions that revealed nothing. Their weapons were visible, but not drawn. Marcus understood that this was not exactly a request, but it was not quite a kidnapping either. Standing Tall Woman was offering him a choice, but only one answer would be acceptable. "I will come," Marcus said. Standing Tall Woman nodded approvingly. "You will ride with me. My father's warriors will follow to ensure we are not pursued." Marcus quickly gathered a few supplies from the cabin and saddled his horse. As they prepared to leave, Standing Tall Woman moved close enough to speak privately. "My father knows that you saved my life," she said quietly. "But he also knows that our peoples are enemies. You must be very careful what you say to him. Running Bear is wise, but he has lost many friends and family members to white soldiers and settlers. His heart is full of anger." "Why does he want to see me?" Marcus asked. Standing Tall Woman hesitated. "There are things happening that you do not know about. My people are facing a crisis that could destroy us. My father believes you might be able to help, but he needs to judge your character for himself." Before Marcus could ask what kind of crisis she was talking about, Standing Tall Woman had mounted her horse and signaled for the group to move out. They rode in single file through the darkness, with Standing Tall Woman leading, Marcus following, and the 2 Apache warriors bringing up the rear. The trail they followed was unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. It wound through narrow canyons and across rocky ridges that seemed impassable, but Standing Tall Woman guided them with the confidence of someone who had traveled this route many times before. Occasionally, they passed rock formations that had been marked with Apache symbols, and Marcus realized they were following an ancient trail that his people had used for generations. After about an hour of steady riding, they began to climb toward a high plateau that Marcus had never explored. The air grew cooler as they gained elevation, and the landscape became more rugged and wild. Pine trees appeared among the rocks, and Marcus could hear the sound of running water somewhere in the distance. Finally, they reached the entrance to a canyon that was hidden behind a massive rock formation. The opening was so narrow that they had to dismount and lead their horses through single file. But once they were inside, the canyon opened up into a circular space perhaps 100 yards across, with walls that rose straight up on all sides like the interior of a cathedral. The most striking feature of the canyon was a natural spring that bubbled up from the center of the floor, forming a small pool surrounded by grass and wildflowers. The pool was perfectly clear, and even in the moonlight, Marcus could see that it was quite deep. Ancient pictographs covered the canyon walls, depicting scenes of hunting, warfare, and religious ceremonies that had probably been painted centuries ago. A small fire burned near the pool, and beside it sat an elderly Apache man who could only be Chief Running Bear. He was smaller than Marcus had expected, probably about average height, and lean rather than powerful. But there was an undeniable dignity in his bearing, and his weathered face showed intelligence and strength of character that commanded immediate respect. Running Bear was dressed simply in buckskin pants and shirt with a single eagle feather in his graying hair. He wore no jewelry or ornaments except for a necklace of bear claws that Marcus guessed had some special significance. Despite his age, which Marcus estimated to be around 60, the chief's eyes were sharp and alert. Standing tall woman approached her father and spoke to him quietly in Apache. Running Bear listened without expression, then gestured for Marcus to approach the fire. Marcus walked forward slowly, unsure of the proper protocol for meeting an Apache chief. He had heard that some tribes considered direct eye contact to be rude, but he had also heard that showing fear was seen as weakness. When Marcus was about 10 feet from the fire, Running Bear raised his hand, signaling him to stop. The chief studied Marcus for a long moment, taking in every detail of his appearance. Finally, he spoke in English that was heavily accented, but clear. "You are the white man who saved my daughter from the fire," Running Bear said. It was not a question. "Yes," Marcus replied. "My name is Marcus Sullivan." "I know who you are," Running Bear said. "I know about your ranch, your cattle, and your life before you came to Apache land. I've been watching you since my daughter told me what you did." Marcus felt a chill at the thought that he had been under surveillance without knowing it. But he tried to show no reaction to Running Bear's words. "My daughter says you risked your life to help her even though our peoples are enemies," Running Bear continued. "She says you treated her with respect and kindness when you could have left her to die or taken advantage of her weakness. Is this true?" Standing tall woman needed help. Marcus said simply, "I could not leave her to die in the fire." Running Bear nodded slowly. Many white men would have done exactly that, and many Apache warriors would have left a wounded white man to die as well. "Why are you different?" Marcus thought carefully before answering. He sensed that Running Bear was testing him, that his response would determine what happened next. "I judge people by their actions, not by the color of their skin or the tribe they belong to," he said finally. "Your daughter is a good person who was in trouble. That was all that mattered to me." Running Bear was quiet for several minutes, staring into the fire and apparently considering Marcus's words. Finally, he looked up again. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a flat rock across the fire from him. Marcus sat down, trying to appear relaxed despite his nervousness. Standing tall woman settled on another rock nearby, while the two warriors remained standing at the edge of the firelight. "I will tell you why I wanted to meet you," Running Bear said. "My people are facing the end of our world. The white soldiers have driven us from most of our traditional lands. Game is becoming scarce. Our young men are angry and want to fight, but fighting will only lead to our destruction. The white government wants us to surrender and go to live on a reservation like prisoners." Running Bear paused to stir the fire with a stick, sending sparks up toward the star-filled sky above the canyon. "I am old and tired of war," he continued. "I have seen too many of my people die fighting battles we cannot win. But I am also the chief, and I cannot let my people be destroyed or enslaved. I must find another path, a way to preserve something of who we are." Marcus listened intently, beginning to understand why he had been brought here. But he still was not sure what Running Bear expected from him. "My daughter told me something interesting about you," Running Bear said, looking directly at Marcus. "She said that you own your ranch, that you make your own decisions about how to use your land. Is this true?" "Yes," Marcus replied. "I bought the land and own it legally according to white man's law." Running Bear nodded. "And you have water on your land? Good grass for cattle?" "Yes, there are several springs and a year-round creek. The grass is good for grazing." "How much land do you own?" Marcus was puzzled by the direction of the conversation, but he answered honestly. "About 2,000 acres, maybe a little more." Running Bear exchanged glances with Standing Tall Woman, and Marcus saw her nod slightly. He had the feeling that some kind of silent communication was taking place between father and daughter. "I have a proposal for you," Running Bear said finally. "Something that could benefit both your people and mine, but something that would require great courage and wisdom from you." "What kind of proposal?" Marcus asked cautiously. Running Bear leaned forward, his eyes intense in the firelight. "I want you to allow some of my people to live on your land, not as prisoners or workers, but as partners. We would help you raise cattle and protect your ranch from bandits and raiders. In return, you would provide us with a place where we could live according to our traditions, where our children could grow up free." Marcus was stunned. The proposal was unlike anything he had ever imagined. "I do not understand," he said. "How could that possibly work?" "The territorial government would never allow Apache people to live on a white man's ranch." "Ah," Running Bear said with a slight smile, but they would not have to know that Apache people were living there. To anyone who asked, you would simply say that you had hired some Mexican vaqueros to help with your cattle. My people can pass for Mexican when necessary, especially if we dress like ranch hands rather than Apache warriors. Marcus's mind raced as he tried to process what Running Bear was suggesting. It was an incredible risk for everyone involved. If the authorities discovered that he was harboring Apache people on his land, he would probably be arrested and his ranch confiscated. But if it worked, it could provide a safe haven for at least some of Standing Tall Woman's people. Why would you trust me with something so important? Marcus asked. Running Bear was quiet for a moment before answering. Because my daughter trusts you, he said finally, and because I have watched you for months now. You're not like other white men I have known. You work your land yourself rather than exploiting others. You do not cheat or steal or treat people badly. Most importantly, you saved my daughter's life when you could have left her to die. But even if I agreed, Marcus said, how many people are we talking about? And what about the other ranchers and townspeople? They might become suspicious if they see too many new faces. Only a few families to start with, Running Bear explained. Perhaps 15 or 20 people total. We will be very careful to avoid attention. My people are skilled at remaining invisible when necessary. Standing Tall Woman spoke for the first time since they had arrived at the canyon. This is not just about saving a few Apache lives, she said. It is about preserving our culture and traditions. If all of our people are forced on our reservations, we will lose everything that makes us who we are. Our language, our ceremonies, our connection to the land. All of it will disappear within a generation or two. Marcus began to understand the true scope of what Running Bear was asking. It was not just about providing temporary shelter for a few Apache families. It was about creating a place where Apache culture could survive in secret, hidden in plain sight on a white man's ranch. And what would happen if we were discovered? Marcus asked. Running Bear's expression became grim. You would probably be arrested and imprisoned. My people would be killed or sent to a reservation in a place far from here where the land is bad and many die from disease and starvation. Then, why should I take such a risk? The question hung in the air for several minutes while Running Bear considered his answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but intense. Because it is the right thing to do, he said simply. Because you have the power to save lives and preserve something beautiful and ancient that would otherwise be lost forever. And because I think you're the kind of man who would rather die trying to do something good than live safely doing nothing at all. Marcus felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him like a physical force. Everything Running Bear said was true. The Apache people were facing cultural extinction, and Marcus had the opportunity to help prevent that tragedy. But the risks were enormous, not just for him, but for Standing Tall Woman and her people as well. I need time to think about this, Marcus said finally. Running Bear nodded. Of course, this is not a decision to make quickly, but I must warn you that time is running short. The soldiers are increasing their pressure on all Apache bands. Within a few months, my people may have no choice but to surrender or die fighting. Standing Tall Woman leaned forward. My father is offering you something that has never been offered to a white man before, she said. He is offering to share our most sacred traditions with you, to treat you as family rather than as an enemy. Do you understand how great an honor that is? Marcus did understand, and the knowledge made his decision even more difficult. Running Bear was not just asking for help. He was offering friendship and trust that crossed generations of hatred and warfare. If I agreed to this, Marcus said slowly, what would be expected of me? What will my responsibilities be? You would be the bridge between our worlds, Running Bear replied. You would help my people learn to live in the white man's world when necessary, and you would learn about our ways. You would be responsible for protecting the secret and ensuring that no one discovers the truth about who your new ranch hands really are. And in return, you would have the loyalty and protection of people who would die before they betrayed you. You would have workers who know this land better than any white man ever could. And you would have the satisfaction of knowing that you helped preserve something precious and irreplaceable. Marcus looked around the sacred canyon, at the ancient pictographs on the walls, and the clear pool reflecting the stars overhead. He thought about Standing Tall Woman and the remarkable days they had spent together at the line cabin. He thought about all the Apache families who were facing an impossible choice between death and cultural extinction. I will give you my answer in 3 days, Marcus said finally. Can you meet me at the line cabin? Running Bear smiled for the first time that evening. We will be there, he said. And, Marcus Sullivan, I hope you will choose to be a friend to the Apache people. We have had too few friends among your kind. The ride back to the line cabin was made in silence, each person lost in their own thoughts. When they arrived, Standing Tall Woman walked Marcus to his horse before preparing to leave with the warriors who had escorted them. What will you decide? She asked quietly. I honestly do not know, Marcus replied. What your father is asking is incredibly dangerous for everyone involved. Standing Tall Woman nodded. But it is also an incredible opportunity. How many people get the chance to change the course of history? And how many people are destroyed trying? Marcus countered. Standing Tall Woman smiled sadly. That is the risk of trying to do something important. But, Marcus, I want you to know that whatever you decide, I will understand. You have already done more for my people than you had any obligation to do. As Marcus rode home through the pre-dawn darkness, his mind churned with questions and possibilities. By the time he reached his ranch, he had thought through dozens of scenarios, but he was no closer to making a decision. The next 3 days would determine not only his own future, but possibly the fate of Running Bear's people as well. Marcus spent the next 3 days in a state of constant anxiety, weighing the enormous decision that lay before him. He tried to go about his normal ranch duties, but his mind kept returning to Chief Running Bear's proposal. The idea of providing sanctuary for Apache families was both thrilling and terrifying. One moment he would convince himself it was the right thing to do, and the next moment he would imagine all the ways it could go catastrophically wrong. On the second day, Marcus rode into Tucson to gather information that might help him make his decision. He visited the general store, the saloon, and the military post, listening carefully to conversations about Apache activity in the region. What he learned was disturbing. The territorial government was indeed increasing pressure on all Apache bands to surrender and move to reservations. Several recent military expeditions have been launched into the mountains, and the commanding officer at Fort Lowell was publicly promising to end Apache resistance within 6 months. There were also rumors that Apache leaders who refused to surrender would be hunted down and killed rather than captured. More troubling still, Marcus learned that there was a substantial bounty being offered for information leading to the capture of Chief Running Bear. Several bounty hunters and Indian scouts were already scouring the mountains, hoping to claim the reward. If Running Bear and his people were going to find sanctuary anywhere, it would have to happen soon. Marcus also made some discreet inquiries about the legal aspects of hiring Mexican workers for ranch labor. What he learned was encouraging. It was common for ranchers to employ vaqueros from across the border, and the territorial authorities rarely asked questions as long as the workers stayed out of trouble. If Running Bear's people could convincingly pose as Mexican ranch hands, there was a good chance the deception would work. On the morning of the third day, Marcus made his decision. He could not stand by and watch Apache families be destroyed when he had the power to save at least some of them. The risks were enormous, but the potential rewards, both moral and practical, were worth those risks. Marcus spent the day preparing his ranch for the arrival of new workers. He cleaned out an old bunkhouse that he had not used in years, stocked it with basic supplies, and planned out work assignments that would keep any Apache visitors busy and productive. If this arrangement was going to work, it would have to benefit everyone involved. That evening, Marcus rode to the line cabin with a mixture of excitement and terror. He had made the biggest decision of his life, one that would change everything about his future. But he was confident it was the right decision, regardless of the consequences. Running Bear, Standing Tall Woman, and 2 other Apache warriors were waiting for him when he arrived. The chief's expression was calm and patient, but Marcus could sense the tension in the group. Everyone understood that this moment would determine the fate of many people. I have made my decision, Marcus announced without preamble. I will help your people. You can bring families to live on my ranch. The relief that crossed Running Bear's face was unmistakable, though he maintained his dignity and composure. Standing Tall Woman smiled openly, the first time Marcus had seen her look truly happy since the night he had rescued her from the fire. You honor us with your trust, Running Bear said formally. My people will not forget this kindness. Over the next hour, they worked out the practical details of the arrangement. Running Bear would select 3 families, about 15 people total, to begin the experiment. They would arrive at Marcus's ranch over several days, posing as Mexican vaqueros looking for work. Marcus would announce to his neighbors that business had been good enough to hire additional help. The Apache families would live in the renovated bunkhouse and would genuinely work as ranch hands during the day. In the evenings and on rest days, they would be free to maintain their cultural traditions in private. Marcus would pay them fair wages, which they could use to buy supplies and send support to other Apache families still hiding in the mountains. Most importantly, everyone agreed that the arrangement would continue only as long as it remained safe for all involved. If there was any sign that the authorities were becoming suspicious, the Apache families would immediately disperse back into the mountains. "There is one more thing," Running Bear said as their planning session was winding down. "I want you to marry my daughter." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He stared at the Apache chief, unable to speak. Standing tall woman looked equally shocked by her father's announcement. "Father," she said sharply in English, "we did not discuss this." Running Bear held up his hand to silence her. "This arrangement will work only if there is complete trust between our peoples. What better way to ensure that trust than to join our families? Marcus Sullivan has proven himself worthy of respect. He would make a good husband for my daughter." Marcus finally found his voice. "Chief Running Bear, I'm honored by your suggestion, but marriage is not something that can be arranged like a business partnership. Standing tall woman and I barely know each other." "You know each other well enough," Running Bear replied calmly. "You have shared danger together. You have talked about your beliefs and your dreams. You have seen each other's character under pressure. What more do couples need to know?" Standing tall woman stood up abruptly. "Father, this is not the old way. You cannot simply decide who I will marry." Running Bear's expression became stern. "I am still your chief and your father. It is my responsibility to ensure the survival of our people, and this marriage would help guarantee that survival." Marcus could see that the conversation was heading toward a family crisis that could destroy everything they had planned. He decided to intervene before the situation got worse. "Perhaps we should consider a compromise," he suggested. "Standing tall woman and I could spend more time together over the coming months as we work out the arrangements for her people. If we decide we are compatible, we could consider marriage later. But it should be our choice, not an obligation." Running Bear considered this proposal for several minutes. Finally, he nodded slowly. "That is acceptable," he said. "But I will expect an answer within 1 year. My daughter needs a husband, and you need someone who understands both worlds to help you with this undertaking." Standing tall woman was clearly not entirely happy with this arrangement, but she seemed to recognize that it was better than her father's original demand. "I can accept those terms," she said quietly. Over the following weeks, the plan began to take shape exactly as they had envisioned. The first Apache family arrived at Marcus's ranch on a Tuesday morning, posing as Mexican vaqueros seeking work. They were a couple named Black Wolf and Morning Star, along with their 2 young children. Black Wolf was an experienced horseman and cattle handler, while Morning Star was skilled at cooking, sewing, and other domestic tasks. Marcus introduced them to his neighbors as Juan and Maria Morales, along with their children Pablo and Rosa. The family's English was limited but adequate, and their knowledge of Mexican customs was convincing enough to fool casual observers. Most importantly, they were hard workers who quickly proved their value around the ranch. The second family arrived a week later, an older couple named Gray Eagle and Singing Bird, along with their teenage son. They became Jose and Carmen Gutierrez and their son Miguel. Gray Eagle was an expert tracker and hunter, skills that proved invaluable for protecting the ranch from predators and rustlers. The third family was a young couple named Swift Horse and Dancing Water with an infant daughter. They became Roberto and Elena Herrera and Little Anna. Swift Horse was particularly good with horses, and he began training Marcus's stock using Apache techniques that were far more effective than traditional white methods. Standing Tall Woman arrived last, posing as Marcus's new housekeeper under the name Isabel Martinez. Her height and imposing presence made her somewhat conspicuous, but Marcus explained to curious neighbors that she was from a mountain region of Mexico where people grew unusually tall. Most accepted this explanation without question. The transformation of Marcus's ranch was remarkable. With the help of his Apache workers, productivity increased dramatically. The cattle were healthier, the horses were better trained, and various improvements were made to the buildings and equipment. Most importantly, the ranch became a much safer place as the Apache families used their traditional skills to watch for threats and dangers. But the most significant changes were not practical, but personal. Living and working alongside Apache families gave Marcus insights into their culture that few white men had ever experienced. He learned about their spiritual beliefs, their deep connection to the natural world, and their sophisticated understanding of human nature. The Apache families, in turn, learned valuable skills for surviving in the white man's world. They practiced speaking English and Spanish, learned about American laws and customs, and gained experience in ranching techniques that they could teach to other Apache people. Standing Tall Woman proved to be the perfect bridge between the two cultures. Her intelligence and education allowed her to serve as translator and mediator when conflicts or misunderstandings arose. She also took on the responsibility of teaching Marcus about Apache traditions and beliefs. As the months passed, Marcus found himself falling genuinely in love with Standing Tall Woman. Their shared experiences had created a bond that went far beyond physical attraction or cultural curiosity. They understood each other in ways that seemed almost magical, as if they could communicate without words. Standing Tall Woman's feelings for Marcus were more complicated. She respected him enormously and was grateful for everything he had done for her people. But she struggled with the idea of marrying outside her culture, even though she knew such marriages were sometimes necessary for political reasons. The arrangement worked so well that by winter, word had spread through the Apache community about the sanctuary Marcus was providing. Several other families approached Running Bear about joining the group, but the chief wisely decided to keep the numbers small to avoid attracting attention. The real test came in the spring when a territorial official arrived at Marcus's ranch to investigate reports of increased Apache activity in the area. Marcus's heart pounded as the official questioned him about his workers and examined the ranch buildings. But the Apache families played their Mexican roles perfectly, and the official left satisfied that everything was normal. That evening, as Marcus and Standing Tall Woman sat on the porch of his ranch house, she made an announcement that surprised him. "I have decided to accept your marriage proposal," she said quietly. Marcus turned to look at her in confusion. "I do not recall proposing marriage," he said. Standing Tall Woman smiled. "You have been proposing to me every day for months, even if you have not said the words. The way you look at me, the way you treat me, the respect you show for my people, these are all proposals." Marcus felt his heart racing. "And you want to accept?" "I want to become your wife," Standing Tall Woman said simply. "Not because my father wishes it, but because I love you. You have shown me that it is possible for our peoples to live together in peace and understanding. I want to spend my life building that kind of bridge between our worlds." Marcus reached for her hand, marveling at how perfectly it fit with his despite the difference in their sizes. "I love you too," he said, "more than I ever thought possible." They were married in a ceremony that blended both cultures, officiated by a Mexican priest who asked no inconvenient questions, and witnessed by both Apache families and several of Marcus's white neighbors who had grown fond of the woman they knew as Isabel Martinez. The marriage proved to be even more successful than the ranch partnership. Marcus and Standing Tall Woman complemented each other perfectly with his practical knowledge and her cultural wisdom, creating a combination that benefited everyone around them. Over the years that followed, their ranch became a secret haven for dozens of Apache families. Some stayed permanently, while others used it as a temporary refuge while traveling to safer locations. The arrangement required constant vigilance and careful management, but it succeeded in preserving Apache culture and traditions that would otherwise have been lost. Marcus and Standing Tall Woman had 3 children together, 2 sons and a daughter who grew up fluent in both English and Apache, comfortable in both cultures. They became living symbols of the possibility for peace and understanding between peoples who had been enemies for generations. The official history books would record this period as the final defeat of the Apache people, their forced relocation to reservations, and the end of their traditional way of life. But the real story was more complex and more hopeful. In hidden corners of the Arizona Territory, on ranches and in small communities, Apache culture survived and evolved, preserved by people who understood that diversity makes society stronger, not weaker. Marcus never regretted his decision to help Chief Running Bear's people. The risks had been enormous, and there had been many close calls over the years. But the rewards, the lives saved, the culture preserved, the love he had found with Standing Tall Woman, made every danger worthwhile. Years later, when Marcus was an old man, he would often sit on his porch in the evening and watch his grandchildren playing in the yard. Some had the dark hair and bronze skin of their Apache heritage, while others showed the fair coloring of their Irish grandfather. All of them were Americans, but they were also something more, living proof that the human capacity for understanding and love could overcome even the deepest divisions. The story of Marcus Sullivan and Standing Tall Woman never made it into the official histories of the American West, but it lived on in the memories and traditions of the families they helped save, and in the quiet knowledge that sometimes, in the most unlikely circumstances, ordinary people can choose to do extraordinary things. Their legacy was not written in books or carved in stone, but lived on in the hearts of those who understood that true courage comes not from fighting enemies, but from turning them into friends.